I am now pleased to introduce my former coworker, Katina. Katina Fontes is the president and founder of Athena Education. Her professional experience includes working in various educational settings, including schools, universities, and nonprofits. Her interdisciplinary academic background and nonprofit experience provide her with a firm foundation for innovation and an instinct for forward-thinking educational program design. Katina received a PhD in education from Lesley University in 2021. She also holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology, a master's degree in education, and a certificate of advanced graduate studies in heritage studies. She is the former education coordinator for the Wayside Inn Foundation and director of the Heritage Studies graduate program at Regis College. As an active volunteer, Katina served on the Wayside Inn and Sudbury Historical Society boards and is currently a Goodnow Library trustee. Now I'm going to turn it over to Katina.
Thank you, Lauren. Can everyone hear me? Am I good to go?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren, for the introduction, and it's good to be working with Lauren again. And good evening to all of you joining us tonight. In a moment, I will say a little more about the Wayside Inn and get into tonight's topic. But first, I would like all of us to do a little thought exercise. You can write down your responses or hold on to them or keep them in the back of your mind. It's up to you. So, oops, see, I'm having trouble here. Here we go. Think of your favorite New England historic site. So maybe it's the RJD, it could be the Wayside Inn or some other location. And who comes to mind first when thinking of that site? And what aspects of history are most associated with it? So think about that for a moment. Now think about what else you would like to learn more about at this site. And then just hold on to these thoughts at the end of the presentation. We'll circle back. And we will just begin. So as Lauren mentioned in her introduction, I worked with her at the Wayside Inn Foundation as the education coordinator. And tonight I will be sharing some of that work as it relates to efforts to expand educational programming at the site. The title, Finding the Spark to Light the Fire, is an homage to a project that involved the making of a mashoon, which is a canoe using millennia-old indigenous burning techniques. But the title also stands as a metaphor for sparking interest in new narratives at sites of history and efforts on the part of staff to be more inclusive in the stories that we research and share. So just a little background about the Wayside Inn. The Wayside Inn is located in Sudbury, Massachusetts. It includes 9 historic structures on more than 100 acres. Some of you may be familiar with the grist mill, the Martha Mary Chapel, or Redstone School, but it is best known for the tavern, now restaurant, on the site, currently known as Longfellow's Wayside Inn. All of these buildings are part of the Wayside Inn historic site. It is also known for a few historical figures. Ezekiel Howe, who is the son of David Howe, the first proprietor of Howe's Tavern. Ezekiel Howe was also led a militia to Concord on April 19, 1775. Therefore, much of the focus in programming and exhibits throughout the inn has traditionally been focused on the Revolutionary War and the colonial period. Another famous figure associated with the Wayside Inn is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the famous poet. Interestingly, Longfellow visited only one time in 1862. After that visit, he wrote a collection of poetry titled Tales of Wayside Inn, which featured a character called the landlord or squire, and this was based on Lyman Howe, the last Howe family member to serve as innkeeper. Because of this association with Longfellow, Lyman Howe is another historical figure frequently connected with the Wayside Inn. Henry Ford, the 20th century industrialist, is another famous historical figure with a Wayside Inn connection. Ford owned the Wayside Inn from 1923 until it was placed into a trust in 1944. He turned the site into a bustling tourist destination and gave the property much of its current landscape. He added the grist mill, the Martha Mary Chapel. He moved the Redstone School from Sterling to where it sits today, and he moved the Boston Post Road away from the buildings. What all of these historical figures have in common, as you might have guessed, is that they are all white men. The Feeding the Fire Machine project, and other projects I'm going to share with you tonight are part of a broader initiative at the Wayside Inn to tell stories of those traditionally left out of the historical narrative at sites. The story of not just the Indigenous population during and after English settlement, but also stories of women who, if they are mentioned at all, are either discussed in association with their husbands or romanticized. And I will get into that a little more. And the stories of workers or the enslaved. Longfellow's Wayside Inn, and the property of more than 100 acres, has been operational in some way or another for more than 300 years. This has required the work of dozens, if not hundreds, to keep the place running at any point in time. Yet the stories of those workers are often not shared. So at this point, I just want to pause and make a little disclaimer. This work is not about canceling people or revising away events in history. The roles played by the men I just mentioned a few minutes ago remain important. However, it is also important to dig deeper and recognize all the other people who supported them or have stories of their own to share. So some of you may be asking why? Why look for new stories or expand the established narratives? The answer is multi-pronged. First, all cultural institutions, museums, historic homes, living history sites are looking for ways to engage new audiences. By this, I mean younger visitors and sectors of the population that feel disconnected from the topic being shared. These potential visitors have heard stories of the American Revolution or of the colonial period over and over again in school. They want to learn new stories or the story beneath the story. They also have choices. Every community in New England has a historic home or a site, and visitors can pick and choose how to spend their time and money. They also have access to information and can vet a museum or site online before visiting. Long story short, historic sites need to attract these audiences to stay in business, and this requires creativity. The second reason for sharing new stories is to provide a more holistic historical narrative. By sharing the stories beyond the accomplishments of famous men, we help people connect to the story of the site by making it more relevant. And this brings us to the third reason, finding ways to make local history relevant. Local history often feels unimportant or disconnected from the issues of the modern day. Expanded narratives help us better understand the challenges of today's communities within the context of their messy past. And finally, new narratives not only attract new audiences, but also help people within communities connect to one another. We find commonality in stories, and this in turn helps us better understand the experiences of our neighbors. So tonight, I will share 3 Wayside Inn programs from 2022 that helped us connect with new audiences through the sharing of new historical narratives. These examples are different in their historical content and the type of programs. So we have one exhibit, one participatory event, and one 2-week interactive and immersive experience. So the first example I want to share is an exhibit that I worked on with Lauren and our colleague Sally Hild on the life and legend of Jerusha Howe. And this project was the culmination of 2 years of research on the granddaughter of Ezekiel Howe, and it was a labor of love. It really was a pleasure to put together. Prior to the exhibit, Jerusha Howe was best known as a ghost. For the past few decades, travelers from near and far have come to Longfellow's Wayside Inn to stay in room number 9 because of a belief that it is haunted by Jerusha. While it is true that rooms number 9 and 10 were Jerusha's private rooms, we wanted to dispel some of the mythology around Jerusha Howe, which portrays her as heartbroken, sickly, and aloof. Much of this lore and legend stems from late 19th century fanciful stories about her that were written about her more than 50 years after her death, which focused on her unmarried status, her beauty, and speculation about lost love. She is also referred to as the Belle of Sudbury. She died at the age of 44 of consumption, so she was likely ill for many years. However, this may have also contributed to stories of her beauty, as the side effects of tuberculosis were viewed as attractive at the time. The Wayside Inn staff wanted to learn more about what we believed was rooted in truth: Jerusha's intelligence, musical skill, and charitable work, for example. The exhibit showcased primary sources related to these and other aspects of her life and shared information about the education of affluent young women in the 19th century. The resulting exhibit was well received, but it reinforced the extent to which documents and objects related to women are disregarded, mishandled, or lost, as is the case of a portrait we know once existed of Jerusha and is now missing. We had to work around this lack of primary source documentation to more accurately depict the real Jerusha Howe, a woman who was well-read and educated, as we know through her journal, a charitable woman of means, which we know through her will and bequest to the industrious poor of Sudbury, and a talented musician with the first pianoforte in town. We know that visitors often came to her family's tavern to listen to her play and entertain guests. Through our research, we also believe that her family likely relied on her assistance in running the tavern, which began to decline after her brother Lyman took over. Lyman, while a charismatic figure immortalized in Longfellow's poetry, was not as successful as their father Adam in running the family business. Lyman was also an alcoholic, and we know that Jerusha had strong feelings about drinking. In her journal, she writes of her dislike for drinking in her journal, referring to intemperance as the most aggravating of all vices, and if it once takes hold, cannot be easily discarded. In the 20 years that followed Jerusha's death, her entire family passed away, leaving no direct heirs to ownership of the tavern and land. The Howe family in the 19th century was like any family then and now, dealing with the consequences of pain, suffering, and loss in a period of political and economic change. If you would like to learn more about this exhibit, which is unfortunately in the process of being replaced with a new one about the Wayside Inn during the Ford era, you can visit the digital exhibition guide. And at the end of my presentation, I will drop a series of links into the chat so you can get more information about the things that I'm discussing tonight. The second example is an event. Reading Frederick Douglass Together is a mass humanities statewide initiative that encourages communities to gather and collectively read Douglass's July 5th, 1852 address, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." Our goals with this program were to bring the community together to participate in an immersive experience and reflect on the upcoming Independence Day holiday through a different lens. The public was invited to come to the patio of Longfellow's Wayside Inn on June 25th last year to read or listen to Douglass's address while enjoying a continental breakfast. The event included a guest speaker, Henry Hayes, the town manager at the time, who introduced the reading with his own reflections. After the reading, everyone was invited to sit at tables and discuss the following questions. Why read this speech and why read it now? What part of the speech do you find particularly powerful and why? And is there a part of the speech that resonated with an experience you had of belonging or not belonging? Excuse me. We also wanted to honor the life and work of Frederick Douglass while sharing historical connections to the Wayside Inn and Sudbury. This required us to do a little research. We began by looking to our namesake, poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Douglass and Longfellow's work inspired one another. In Douglas's full speech, he quotes Longfellow's poem, A Psalm of Life. Longfellow, in turn, was inspired after hearing Douglas speak in Boston in 1860, the result of which was Paul Revere's Ride, later included in Tales of a Wayside Inn in The Landlord's Tale. Douglas also visited Sudbury on at least 2 occasions, one of which was in 1844, and it was less than positive. In fact, he referred to Sudbury as the darkest of all places in Massachusetts in a letter to William Lloyd Garrison. These connections to Douglas, the historical figure, combined with the reading of his words, gave us an opportunity to reflect on the community then and now, and on the legacy of slavery. The Wayside Inn Foundation secured a grant for this program for Mass Humanities. However, any organization or group of people can sponsor a reading. There are some happening around the state this month in honor of Black History Month and Douglas's birthday. You can also participate by attending a reading, and Mass Humanities has a calendar of upcoming reading events. The third and final example I want to discuss is the Machoon Project. This was our most ambitious project last year. A machoon is a fresh tree log, in this case a pine, shaped into a canoe through a process of monitored burning 24/7 for a period of 1 week to 10 days. Our machoon, because of the drought last summer, took 6 days, so it was a really quick burn. Those feeding and monitoring the fire camped out in the nearby woods and cooked many of their meals on the machoon fire. Visitors were encouraged to stop by during the day, throughout the project, and for one evening event to ask questions of those tending the fire. We ended the project with a celebration and launch in the nearby pond. And today the machoon remains submerged in the pond, because that is how you store a machoon. And it will be pulled up for future Wayside Inn programs and used as needed for Indigenous ceremonies and activities. The project had 3 goals. The first goal was educational. We needed to learn more about the history of the Wayside Inn site from our Indigenous partners. Little to nothing existed in the Wayside Inn archive about local Indigenous groups in and around the site during the early period of English contact. And we knew almost nothing about the history of the site before this time. We attempted an early research project to find primary sources to help us reconstruct this history, but didn't have a lot of luck. This project provided another avenue toward a better understanding of how the Nipmuc in the area would have lived and worked. We also wanted to provide an opportunity for the community to learn more in a fun and interactive way. Hundreds of visitors came through to watch and ask questions about Indigenous life and the machoon making project. It was really an amazing experience. Our final and most important goal was building a relationship with the Nipmuc and other Indigenous communities. The Machoon Project was not our idea. It was proposed by our Indigenous partners after a long period of discussion and trust building. This project provided us with an educational opportunity, but it also provided the Indigenous community with a way to pass along valuable knowledge to future generations and an opportunity to return and gather in an area once teeming with Indigenous life. We partnered with representatives of the Nipmuc and Mashpee Wampanoag, but the project brought in many from other regional Indigenous groups. So I didn't include it in the original presentation, but I did quickly want to mention the upcoming exhibit on the Ford era that Lauren and Sally are working on now. Part of the exhibit will focus on hospitality workers at the inn during the Ford era. The Wayside Inn was, during this time, a successful tourist site, thanks in large part to the hostesses, teachers, musicians, cooks, servers, and other staff who worked behind the scenes. There were also schools. There was just a lot happening on the site, and it was much larger at the time. I'm not involved in this project, but I encourage you to visit and see the exhibit when it is ready, and I heard it's going to be ready soon. And I think there will also be an online guide for those who are unable to visit in person. So we tried throughout my time working at the Wayside Inn and other organizations I've been affiliated with to dig a little deeper into local history and really look beyond the stories of the founding families and historic homes. Communities were as complex 300 years ago as they are today. Expanded stories expand the relevance of history to more people, and this is ultimately the goal of public history. These examples are but a few, and it is my hope that visitors to historic sites will use their collective power to ask for more stories about people who played a role in an event or time. So on that note, let's circle back to the beginning of this presentation. So how might the place you thought about expand the stories it tells? And I'll just give you a moment to think about that. Maybe if people want to share in a few minutes in the chat, I see some chat activity here. And I would just say, when you do see program offerings that you think are innovative or creative or expansive or just kind of hit those points that you've been thinking about, I encourage you to really speak up. You can send notes to the staff, share the good stuff with your friends. And I think one of the best ways to do this is to really capture the viral power of social media. Liking or sharing a post or following a page really does make a difference. It gets the word out and it lets the staff at these sites know that they're doing something that has meaning to people.